The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the rooftops when the square filled with the buzz of boots, spurs, and restless voices. Dust rose from the ground, shimmering in the light like smoke from a dying fire. Men leaned against hitching posts, women clutched parasols, children darted between legs, and at the center of it all stood the rough-hewn wooden platform. Upon it, a widow in a faded black dress held her baby so tightly it seemed her arms might never let go. The child whimpered, a weak, frightened sound swallowed by the noise of the crowd. The town's bell clanged, cutting through the chatter, and the auctioneer stepped forward with his booming voice. Debts must be settled. The man's gone, but his wife and young one remain. Property owed must be property paid. His words dripped with indifference, his hand gesturing at her as if she were nothing more than livestock brought to market. The widow's eyes scanned the sea of faces. Some she knew, most she did not, but all looked at her with the same cold curiosity. Her lips pressed against her child's temple. She whispered promises she could not guarantee, that she would find a way to keep him safe, that she would endure. Behind the whisper lay terror. What if the man who claimed them saw her only as another pair of hands to bleed dry, or worse, a body to own? A hush fell when the first bidder spoke up. A prospector with a scraggly beard and liquor on his breath barked a laugh. She can work my claim. Hard ground, harder nights. Starting bid, $5. The crowd chuckled cruelly. Another voice rose from the back. The town's wealthiest rancher, his belly pressing against his vest, sneered. 10. Worth more to me for stock than for service. His grin widened as his companions snickered. The widow stiffened, clutching the baby tighter. From the edge of the platform, the saloon keeper leaned in with a sly smile. She'd draw coin in my place. 15. His eyes lingered too long, his intent too clear. The widow shut her eyes for an instant, the sting of tears threatening. She would not let them see her break. Her husband's face, pale in death, flashed before her, the accident that was no accident, the whispers of the banker pressing for land he had refused to sell. She knew this moment had been arranged long before today. The auctioneer's chant rolled forward, numbers rising like the rumble of distant thunder. Her child began to cry louder, fists flailing against her dress. Each sob was a knife to her resolve. She rocked him gently, murmuring a lullaby that was drowned beneath the jeers and laughter of men debating her worth. 20, someone barked. 25, shouted another. 30. The widow's knees weakened. With every bid, hope slipped further from reach. Her heart raced so fiercely she thought it might give out. The auctioneer raised his arm, voice swelling for the final call. Then a sound broke across the square, deeper than the chatter, louder than the chant, the pounding of hooves. Heads turned as a rider appeared at the far end of the street, dust rising in his wake. A lone figure, hat pulled low, coat trailing behind, urged his horse forward with unhurried determination. The crowd parted as if compelled by something greater than fear or curiosity. He reined in before the stage, dismounted, and for a moment simply stood, brushing the dust from his gloves. His presence stilled the air. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. Slowly he looked up at the widow, his eyes steady, unreadable. "I'll take them." His voice cut clean through the noise, calm and certain. The square fell into stunned silence. The auctioneer blinked, hand frozen mid-air. The banker shoved forward, his face flushed with anger. "You can't just—" The rider dropped a leather pouch onto the platform. Coins clattered across the wood, their weight undeniable. "Paid in full." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some muttered admiration, others confusion, a few seethed with resentment at being denied the spectacle. The prospector spat on the ground, the rancher cursed under his breath, the saloon keeper slunk back with a scowl. The widow's breath caught. Relief and fear tangled inside her. Who was this man? Savior, or another mask of the same cruelty? Yet when her gaze met his, something in the quiet resolve of his eyes told her he had not come to gloat or to claim, but to protect. Still, she dared not trust too easily. The banker's voice rose, sharp and angry. "This ain't lawful. Papers signed, debts owed." The cowboy turned his head slowly, his expression unchanging. "I said I'll take them." Each word carried weight, deliberate and immovable. The crowd felt the warning in his tone, the promise of steel behind it. The sheriff shifted uneasily, hand brushing the butt of his revolver. Tension crackled in the air, a thin wire stretched to breaking. The widow clutched her child tighter, her heart hammering as she watched men measure their courage against the stranger's calm. Dust swirled at their boots. The square held its breath. And in that charged silence, it became clear, if anyone meant to challenge him, the ground would drink blood before the day was done. The auctioneer lowered his hand. No gavel struck, yet the moment felt final. The widow stood trembling, caught between disbelief and the faintest flicker of hope. The cowboy reached for the reins of his horse, his other hand extended, not toward her, not demanding, but open, patient, as if to say the choice remained hers. The crowd leaned forward, eager to see whether she would step down. She did not move. Not yet. Her baby whimpered against her chest, and she rocked him, eyes fixed on the stranger who had thrown himself between her and the abyss. The banker muttered curses, the sheriff's jaw tightened, and still the man stood, silent as stone. The widow's breath shuddered. This was no end. It was the edge of something vast, uncertain, and dangerous. And though she did not know whether to trust him, she knew one thing: whatever came next, the course of her life had shifted forever. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. The stranger's calm had a weight heavier than iron, a silence that dared anyone to break it. After a long pause, the lawman shifted his stance, muttering something about not spilling blood in front of children. The banker hissed curses, but the moment was lost. The widow adjusted her baby in her arms, trembling, unsure whether she was walking into another kind of trap. The cowboy did not press her. He only lifted his reins and walked toward the edge of the square, each step steady, deliberate. The crowd parted for him again, some whispering, some shaking their heads, a few spitting in the dust. When he reached his horse, he turned, eyes meeting hers once more. His hand rose, not as a command but as an invitation. She hesitated, her feet rooted to the boards. The baby whimpered, the sound soft but urgent, and at last she descended from the stage. Every eye followed her as she placed her trust, however uncertain, in a man whose name she did not even know. They left the square together. The clamor of voices behind them faded into the wind, replaced by the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. The widow held her child close, the scent of dust and leather mingling with the faint sweetness of milk. For the first time in weeks, no one jeered, no one threatened. Still, fear lingered in her chest. She glanced at him, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, his posture upright and unyielding. "Why?" Her voice cracked, quiet yet insistent. "Why would you do this?" He shifted the reins in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Because no one should be sold," he said. The words were simple, almost rough, yet they carried more conviction than all the speeches she had heard in her life. Suspicion tugged at her still. "And what do you want from us?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Nothing you're not willing to give." His tone unsettled her less than his honesty. Men in town had always spoken with schemes curled beneath their words, promises laced with poison. His answer was plain, and that plainness unsettled her in its own way. She studied his face, searching for cruelty hidden in the lines, but found only weariness, as though the world had taken more from him than he cared to admit. The child stirred in her arms, fussing. The cowboy looked over, awkward. "I've wrangled calves and colts, but not one that small." The attempt at humor was clumsy but not unkind. Despite herself, she let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It startled her, how strange it felt to laugh after so much grief. They rode through scrubland and open plains, the air sharp with sage, the sky vast and merciless. She began to speak, not because she trusted him yet, but because silence weighed too heavy. She told him of her husband, how he had been strong, stubborn, unwilling to sell his patch of land. How the banker's men came, how an accident on the trail left her a widow with debts she could never repay. As she spoke, her throat tightened, but the cowboy did not interrupt. He only listened, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing with each detail. When her voice faltered, he finally said, "You deserved better." So did he. The words sank into her like balm, though they did not ease the ache. Far behind, faint dust clouds rose against the horizon. She noticed first, her breath catching. "We're being followed." He turned, scanning the distance. His eyes hardened. "Banker won't let go so easy." The pace quickened. The baby whimpered as the horse jolted, and the widow shielded him with her body, whispering comfort. The sound of hooves grew louder behind them, the shouts of riders carried by the wind. Gunfire cracked. A bullet struck the ground near their horses' hooves. "Hold on," the cowboy said, his voice sharp now, stripped of calm. He wheeled the horse toward a rocky outcrop. Short bursts of gunfire echoed, dust exploding from the ground. The widow clutched her child, heart hammering, every jolt of the ride a fresh terror. They reached cover, sliding from the saddle. The cowboy shoved the reins into her hands. "Keep him safe." Then he drew his revolver, stepping into the open with the steady grace of a man who had stood between life and death before. The riders closed in. Their laughter was cruel, their confidence loud. The banker's men. The first charged, gun raised. The cowboy fired once, precise. The man tumbled from his horse. Another came, shouting, bullets slicing the air. The widow ducked low, shielding her baby, the smell of gunpowder stinging her throat. The cowboy fired again, then again, each shot measured, each strike true. One rider remained, spurring hard, fury in his eyes. He raised his rifle, aiming for the widow. Her breath stopped. The cowboy stepped forward, unflinching. A final shot rang out, and silence followed. The last man fell, his rifle clattering uselessly. The widow's knees weakened. She rocked her child, who whimpered but lived, alive by a margin thinner than thread. She looked at the cowboy, his revolver still smoking in his hand, his chest rising and falling with calm steadiness. For the first time, she felt the depth of his resolve, not just strength, but a refusal to bend where others would. They left the bodies to the dust and rode on until the land softened into rolling hills. At last he guided them to a small ranch tucked against a rise, its fences weathered, its cabin plain but standing strong. He dismounted, offering his hand again. This time she took it without pause. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and leather. The baby quieted, fingers curling around a loose thread in her dress. She sat on the edge of a chair, the silence of safety pressing around her, and the relief overwhelmed her. Tears spilled, unbidden, hot against her cheeks. She turned away, ashamed to break, but he set down his hat, awkward in his gentleness. "You're safe here," he said. The words broke the last wall. She wept openly, clutching her child, and he stood near, uncertain what to do with his hands. At last he patted her shoulder once, clumsy but sincere. The absurdity of his stiffness tugged a quiet laugh from her tears, and for the first time since her husband's death, grief bent into something lighter. That night, the baby slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The widow sat by the fire, staring into the flames, the cowboy across from her. His eyes were far away, lost in memories he did not voice. She wondered about the grief that lived in him, what had carved those lines of silence into his face. She did not ask, and he did not offer, yet something passed between them unspoken, the recognition of wounds that never fully heal. Outside, the wind swept over the plains, carrying away the day's dust and blood. Inside, a fragile peace held. It was not the end of her fear, nor the end of his battles, but it was a beginning neither of them had expected. And as the fire burned low, she knew that the path she had been forced onto in the square had turned toward something else entirely. The course of her life had shifted, and though uncertainty still loomed, there was hope where none had lived before.